Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 15 of Out of Character, a show where your favorite creators drop out of character for an hour to talk with game designer and host Marc Tassin, that would be me, about their art, their process, and the nerdy stuff that inspires them. From the secrets behind their craft to the ins and outs of the business, to the games, shows, and books that they can't get enough of, it's a unique and candid look at the people who create the stuff that you and I love. Comments are open throughout the show, so although we can't make promises, we'll try to pull in any comments or questions you have along the way. Enough preamble, though. Allow me to introduce our guest for this week, Peter Tieryas. Peter, welcome to the show. Hey.
Hi, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
Good. First off, did I even come close to pronouncing your last name properly, Tieryas?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, good. I just want to make sure because I'm sure other people probably wonder as well when they see it. So I want to make sure to get it right because
Thanks
I
for
always hate when
checking.
people completely botch the names. So, hey, so tell everyone a little bit about yourself, about the stuff that you create.
Yeah, I'm the author of the Mecha Samurai Empire series, which is three books. They're all standalone novels, alternate history, inspired a lot by Philip K. Dick, but I also wanted to talk a lot about the stories that I heard growing up about the Asian side of World War II. And so that was something where when I was growing up, I would always hear about the Western side. So it'd be, American-centric, European-centric. But as I got to meet a lot of my family over in Asia, they would tell me totally different kinds of stories. And so that's what I kind of wanted to bring. And so for me, it was kind of merging that sort of history plus a lot of the love that I have for Asian culture, like anime, manga, and all sorts of other things, and video games, of course.
Yeah.
And then from there, like I've written a lot of short stories. I love video games. Currently, I'm a narrative director at Nicholas, working on a couple different projects that are unannounced yet, but that I'm super excited about. And for me, it's just been really exciting to get back into that creative space with video games, and because it's such a different art from novel writing, and yet there's so much from novel writing that has been really important for me as I approach games, and also just sort of my background working in visual effects and feature animation has also been really helpful because the way they approach storytelling, a lot of the sort of focus on characters and story beats, I found
Mhm.
super helpful, and especially when it comes to iteration, because when you see a movie, like most times it's the final product that we see, but behind the scenes there's so much iteration, even for like the individual characters, like how their fingers look, right? They're like literally their fingernails, their teeth, and all that. So for me, it's interesting. I love like one of my favorite parts of writing is working with editors when I get in there. And like I deliver a story, and my editor will be like, "Hey, like let's change everything, right?" And there's always this hesitation when they come to me and they're like, "Hey, can we change a lot?" And like they're waiting to see like how I react, and I'm like, yes, please, like I'm so used to that. Let's make it better. Let's carve things, and let's really hammer away at it. And so for me, like as an a lot of times when people see an author, they only see the author, but there's so many people behind it. So for me, like again, like my editor, and on top of the editors, editorial assistants, there's copywriters. My agent gives a lot of feedback. Everyone that's involved, there's so much involved in it. So it's such a collaborative effort. So no novel is like just the product, at least for me, of just me. It's like all the people around me. So
It's kind of interesting because you're talking about, I've talked to some folks who've worked on television. I've talked to people who've worked on games. The reality is that in most other areas, the collaboration is much more
mhm,
intense and bigger. There's more
mhm,
people involved than there are for authors. Most authors, the collaboration, you're still
mhm.
seeing people helping the editors and things, adding information and probably early readers and things. But the truth is that writing is in its way the least collaborative of the different ways. I wonder if there's ways writing could benefit from even more of that sort of collaboration along the way.
I mean, I can only speak for myself because I know everyone works differently. So I know there's people who prefer not to have as much feedback, but for me
Yeah.
personally, I love that feedback. But like the whole question is, and there have been instances where there's been an editor, I've worked with an editor that has been awesome, but they've given a lot of feedback that changed the nature of the novel to the point, or a short story, where I actually didn't feel connected to the short story or
Yeah.
novel. And so that's where you sort of kind of get into the dangerous ground, right? Where I think um, with the editing that I love and the feedback that I love is when they help me to kind of bring out what I'm going for. So they might say like, at Ace right now it's Anne Swords, and she would often say, "Hey, Peter, I think this is what you're going for, and I think this is how we can get there even better, right? Like if we do it in this way." And almost every time she said that, I'd be like, "You know what? You're absolutely right." And so it's more if it's like I think that's a big part of that where, I have a certain vision, I have a story I want to tell, and it's like, how do we get there? And then for animation, there's always, of course, for a film, there's the director, and ultimately it's, going to that vision. But are we offering feedback for the sake of offering feedback, or are we offering feedback in order to kind of serve that vision? And I think that's where there's kind of that tension there. And so a lot of times, here, an interesting example is sometimes if you're working in an animated film, there are background characters. Now, ideally, you want to make every character look as good as possible, right? But if there's a situation where the background characters look too good, then they actually distract from the main characters. And so when you're on like a screen, you see all like these amazing looking characters, and then like the main character walks by, you don't even pay attention to the main character because the background characters look too good. And so there are times where I've actually gone back and helped like actually make the background characters less interesting looking in order for, and so again, that doesn't make sense, right? Because you want everything to look as good as possible, but again, you're trying to serve that ultimate vision and that ultimate goal. And I think that's again where, the iteration, the collaborative process, it's really important to make sure you don't lose focus on what's the most important part of that.
I think that's great advice for anyone who's working in a creative setting, whether they're in a writer's group or even collaborating on something at work. This whole idea of there's a difference between, you can always find something to get feedback on. There's always something, but is it something that helps to highlight, to better better realize the underlying goal of the person who did the initial creation? And I think that that's a really interesting difference that sometimes gets lost, right, when people are working together. Yeah. Oh, let me ask you a question. A narrative director. I bet most people don't know what that is. So what is that? What is it? What does a narrative director do on a game?
Yeah. So usually, okay. So in terms of my title and like my function, it's overseeing all the narrative within the game, within the studio, within the games, right? So it's not like normally if I was just a writer on a game, then I'd be doing all the writing. But I'm also overseeing several of the other games. So say there's a game that already has a writer and a director, and so I would be working with them to try to kind of bring out their vision. And so an important part of that is me just working with them, like asking them lots of questions, like what are you trying to do? What's the story you're trying to tell? And how are you achieving this through the gameplay? Are there certain things that I feel can help achieve that? And so again, that's me working with them, or it might be just me going in there and say, hey, like here's a new game, here's a new story, like I want to make this pitch, like, if you have a certain idea of you want to do it this way, can we try it this way, and stuff like that. So it's more than just being the writer on a specific project where you're kind of given an assignment and saying, hey, can you execute on this? It's about coming up, again, like, just as the title implies, directing the narrative of these different games. And so I wish I could get into more specifics, but as of yet, the games that I'm working currently on are unannounced. But yeah, it's been, for me, it's been really exciting because I'm so passionate about games, and it's given me this new appreciation for games. Because when you think about, you think, oh, here's a story, and then you're done. But actually, it also involves writing like the text in the menus, right? Like every item you pick up needs text. Every character interaction, and how complex do you want the character interactions to be? Do you want it to be like very simple where you talk to someone and say, hey, this townsperson says go this way, or do you want the townsperson to say it in a kind of interesting way, like, oh, like, oh, I really like the way the sky is shaped this way, and like the colors of the mountains here, like without distracting, like how do you convey information in an interesting way that isn't just expository, which again, you can have that, but it's a matter of judging and assessing where you do that. And so another part that it's interesting for me is also like, how do we make sure the story doesn't get in the way of the gameplay? Because obviously you want them to kind of merge together. And so if the story is kind of distracting from the gameplay, you don't want that. And so again, like, just trying to serve and work with the different teams to bring out the best in the story and the narrative.
Well, I'm sure more of this will come out as it's available, and probably places people can find is, either your WordPress or I assume they can also find you on Twitter. So, folks, you need to watch there if you want to know what we're talking about here. Can't say a whole lot more at this point. Oh, what I do want to do now is
Thank
I
you.
want to take a minute to sort of backtrack from what you're doing today to
Hmm.
your books. And we're not going to talk about your very first book, Bald New World, just yet. Maybe we'll get to that one. I do have some questions about that. We'll see if we have time. But I know folks want to hear a little bit more about these books. Can you give folks who, without any spoilers, sort of the trailer version of like, what are these books about if someone hasn't read them yet?
Yeah, I'd say like the trailer pitch would be Man in the High Castle meets Pacific Rim,
Hmm.
and more so on the second and third books because I think the first book was more focused on the alternate history aspect of it. So it'd almost be like you'd have to kind of put in a little bit of 1984 in there as well.
Uh-huh.
But Cyber Shogun Revolution was the third book in the series, and even though they're like in a series, they're actually all pretty standalone books because they all have new protagonists, new antagonists, and there are certain threads that kind of connect them. But Cyber Shogun Revolution in particular is very different because it's set in like basically 2020. And it's what would the world be like again if the Axis won World War II? And so usually when you see that kind of perspective, it's always set in like, hey, it's right after the war. A Man in the High Castle was set in the 60s, but
Yeah.
I was kind of trying to figure out what would America look like, 70, 80 years later.
Yeah.
And so for me, like it was interesting with Cyber Shogun Revolution because it released in 2019 in March, right when the pandemic hit. And
Yeah.
so I was about to do like a book tour. I was going to do a bunch of podcasts and like book readings and stuff like that. And then the pandemic hit, so basically I had to cancel everything. And so it was kind of, I totally understood, of course, but it was also bittersweet for me because it felt like, oh, the book came out, but like it just kind of went, oh. And so it's kind of the book that came out where I didn't get to talk about as much,
Yeah.
and yet it's like probably for me what I wished, because every book you write, you grow as a writer, and so I
Hmm.
felt Mecha Samurai Empire was a far better book than United States of Japan, and for me, like Cyber Shogun Revolution was almost the book that I wished USJ would have been. Just
Got
because
it.
I'd learned so much, and this is not to take away from USJ because I'm super proud of USJ and where it is, but at the same time, as a writer, I felt like a lot of the themes that I had and that I wanted to explore were just done in a way that I felt much more excited about, and I felt executed on a lot of the ideas. And so, for example, um, for the revolution, a lot of the ideas about like I try to interweave them with the mechas and the battles, and I felt it was done in a more natural and organic way in Cyber Shogun Revolution. And a lot of the ideas that I had that were percolating through my mind, they just came out through that book, and so it's something that I had a lot of fun writing.
Yeah, you are in good or unfortunate company in terms of books coming out before COVID. David Mack was on not long ago, and he had the exact same thing happen. It came out right before COVID.
Ah,
And it was the end of a
uh-huh.
big, huge, epic story he and these other authors had crafted together to tie up years
Uh,
of novels. And it's like going, and we're not going to do anything. Sorry. Just hope people recognize that came out. And it just I can understand how frustrating that would be. Well, so I mean, I think this is great because you're talking about, I want to ask about writing dystopian, right? I know there's a sense of,
mhm.
I mean, is this a dystopian? Would you call it a dystopian future in these novels or just an alternate future?
I would definitely call it a dystopia. It's like an alternate dystopian history.
Okay. And
And it's and but the weird part is like so much of what we call dystopia seems normal, right, and commonplace. Like you read 1984 now, and it seems tame in comparison to the way it is right now. Like just with the amount of information and like the government doesn't even need to report on you, right? Because everyone self-reports and is proud about it, right? It's kind of exciting. Like, hey, let me share what I'm doing, where I'm going, all my political beliefs, all my ideologies, and and stuff like that. So I like that we're in a place where we can do that in society. And at the same time, like reading 1984, I'm like, or even Brave New World, I'm like, oh, this is like, it is really bad, right? But like, you're like, hey, this technology already kind of exists, and we're way beyond that. So, having said that, like Cyber Shogun Revolution, I try to reflect a lot of that. Like some of the ideas that I explore are like video games, where the government is actually tracking your moral choices in video games. So like say,
Yeah.
like I remember I was playing Grand Theft Auto, and there was a point where you make a moral choice, a pretty big choice that weighed heavily on me because when it was actually presented itself, I actually didn't know what to do. And
Hmm.
the interesting thing is when you actually, depending on what choice you make, it doesn't like it does impact the game a little bit, but not really. It's more just like it was your choice, and there's not like a reward or not even like a trophy. It's more just like what do you prefer to do, and neither choice is totally right or wrong. It was really gray. And so that got me thinking, and Mass Effect obviously has tons of those. Like a lot of RPGs these days have these really tough choices. And so what I started thinking was, what if the government actually tracked that, right? And knew what decisions you made, and then extrapolated what kind of beliefs you are, what kind of person you are based on that, and how scary that could be.
Right.
And so that's again, that feels dystopian, and yet there's actually nothing preventing governments from doing that right now. Like all your choices, a lot of times are associated with trophies or rewards, right? Like when you do a certain choice, it's like, oh, whatever trophy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it'd be easy for anyone to track that. And so what if someone determined or made an assessment about who you are based on that? And so again, like running with those kind of ideas and just kind of exploring what that means on just a theoretical and philosophical level.
Yeah. What if the
And and
government?
so and so what I was saying earlier, yeah, sorry.
I was saying, what if the government were to judge you based on your character alignment in D&D, right? I mean, the reality is nobody wants that to happen, right? You don't want them to look at how you play your murder hobo on the weekend and then decide that that's the sort of person you are, right?
Exactly.
So,
And I was just saying, like with the mecha battles, like I felt like one of the things that I really enjoyed doing was every mecha battle in Cyber Shogun has a symbolic meaning, and there's like something going on at a deeper level, representing a certain idea or philosophy, and they're kind of they execute their ideas through their actions. So the battles that take place aren't just like just all out like mecha action, but there's actually something more going on. And I think that's what makes it so interesting, or hopefully it makes it interesting for readers.
I actually read a whole article, just someone talking about the lightsaber battles in Star Wars and how in the original
Uh,
films, each one of those
uh-huh,
battles had
uh-huh.
a very important story element to them. Like the battle
Yeah,
existed to
yeah.
tell a story as opposed to just be a really cool battle where they use laser swords, right? I
Hmm.
mean, it was
Yeah.
supposed to be more than that. And I think that
Uh-huh,
that's interesting because that was one of the complaints people had say about episode one is saying like, well,
uh-huh,
that battle was awesome, but
uh-huh.
was it about the characters when they were fighting each other? And it wasn't really. It was just
Hmm.
really awesome. Don't get me wrong, I
Hmm.
love it. But I think that that's, it's what you're saying is that you can have
Uh-huh.
something like that that's cool, but it becomes so much more important and richer and engaging when there's a story to it, when the characters matter, when what they're doing matters and the outcome. Yeah, it's very
Yeah.
cool.
Yep.
Yeah, so what I was wondering is what it's like writing this. You actually kind of touched on what I was going to ask. Writing dystopian fiction in a world that a lot of people
Hmm.
perceive at times as being dystopian. How you do that, how what it feels like.
It's interesting you mentioned that because I think pre-pandemic I was more disposed towards writing dystopian works,
Mhm,
but ever since the pandemic, I've kind of gravitated towards more hopeful works. And
mhm.
so like I want to focus on more positive, hopeful messages. I think I mean you don't even need to watch dystopias anymore. You just watch the news, right? I feel depressed watching the news right now. Uh, yeah, and so I've had a personal shift. Like some of the projects that I'm currently working on right now, I've specifically focused on being more hopeful and being more positive, and really like not being like cheesy, like oh, like everything's
Yeah.
positive, like it's a fantasy or like a fairy tale, but just trying to find a more meaningful message where people are collaborating towards a positive end, even if there are, say, negative elements going on or dystopian elements around. Hopefully, like my stories will provide a more hopeful message. So,
Well, and I
having
think
said that, like I think the thing with dystopias, uh, sorry, go ahead.
well, I was just going to say, apologize to everyone. There's a little bit of a delay, so we're going to do our best to handle the walkie-talkie effect now and then on this. Um, w- I think that one of the challenges is that
Okay.
there seems to be a loss for folks a little bit. Oh, I lost him completely. Well, We will have Peter back in just a second. I'm sure of it. And we'll be talking some more about it and just talking about dystopian fiction and hope and how you bring those stories into focus. And in fact, one of the things that, is true is that during darker times in our history, we tend to start to see people try to tell positive stories. And it seems like when things are going well is when you start to get people saying, well, it could be worse. You should appreciate what you have. It's just a fascinating balance between the two as people are telling stories in our society. And so I think that's one of the things you'll see. It's kind of like Star Trek came at a time when there was great upheaval. And one of the things that Gene Roddenberry wanted to show was that it is possible for us to move past it into something that's better than what we had today. That would be, we could actually improve our lot in life and go on to do something new. So in the meantime, if you have any questions, we're going to wait for Peter here for a few minutes here and give him a chance to get back on. Feel free to type any questions you have in so you can give me a topic of conversation. And Peter is back. So hang on just a second. Hello.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah, I was here. I think, yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know what's going on. My apologies.
Hey, that's all right. Technical problems happen. We get it. So one of the challenges of our brave new world. So yeah, well, what we were talking about was while you were gone, what I and the audience were talking about was we were discussing
Hmm.
the tendency, the correlation on when people feel that times are dark, artists often feel a need to
Hmm.
look to a hopeful future, to the idea and tell a message that we can make things better.
Yep.
It gets better than it is today.
Yeah.
And we've seen it happen time and again, where when things are
Hmm.
going well, a lot of times people are like going, well, it could be worse. How
Yeah.
about this?
Yeah.
So like in the
I also
80s,
think it's interesting. You mentioned that because also
no, go
with
ahead.
just with age and just having a kid, I think my ever since I had my daughter, basically I've gone towards wanting a more positive and hopeful future,
Right.
and trying to focus. Yeah. And like it's interesting just because there's a lot of things that have changed for me personally. Like I just on a basic level, if I see any like say a mystery movie where there's kids in danger, like I cannot watch it anymore, right? Nor can I even write about it or anything because I can. That's not something I even want to imagine. Whereas before, like I was like, oh, kid mystery, like how do we solve, and stuff like that, like True Detective. I love True Detective, but like season three, it's like the kids go missing, and I was like, I cannot watch this. Like I had to
Uh-huh.
stop because it just disturbed me too much. And again, it's something a show that I love, and I was like, I cannot go forward with it. And so I think that also has impacted me a lot. Just again seeing a child grow up, and then imagining what kind of universe they're going to live in, and like also just being aware, like when she grows up, she's going to read my work. So what's she going to think, right? And so it's funny because like we were mentioning lightsabers earlier. I heard like someone joking like as Spielberg grew older, like his younger works are a little bit darker, and he himself has said like as he grown older, he thinks a lot more about family and stuff like
Mhm.
that. And so it was kind of it's interesting for me to see it in myself. And so like even in my current writing, there is a darker streak to it, but at the same time, there's also a lot more hopefulness in it. So it's kind of mixed together. Obviously, the pandemic was a big part of that, and then also just like having a kid and a family and stuff.
Right. Well, speaking of lightsabers, tell me a little bit about what a technical writer for Lucas Arts does. That's something you've done. It's on your resume. What does
Yeah.
that mean?
Well, I wrote some of the game manuals, so it that meant a lot to me because when I was growing up, a big part of my childhood was video games and reading the video game manuals because a lot of the stories were very limited just because of the memory limitations. So for me, I still remember Legend of Zelda reading the manual and just rereading it over and over again, looking at the arts, trying kind of imagine new worlds. And I think that's what also the creator Miyamoto wanted to do was he wanted to create like a playground based on what he experienced in his childhood. And so for me, I remember like just playing Zelda, being blown away by it, and then like with friends, almost like Goonies, where there was like a sewer system, and there was like a cave under there, and I went in there. We hopped over the fence with a couple friends, went down there, and we kind of tried to play almost like Zelda, where we were kind of exploring the dungeon, trying to figure out what's going on. And so because of that, like, and because there were so many manuals that were really great for me, like another example is Ultima. I love the manuals in the Ultima games on the Nintendo version, and so uh, that I, it kind of really motivated me as a writer to imagine new world. And so when I grew older and I had the chance to work for Lucas, I wanted to work on the video game manuals. And so one of the first manuals I wrote was they were doing for Star Wars Starfighter. They were doing a special edition on the Xbox. So my job was going in there and like figuring out like how the controls had changed from the PS2 to the Xbox. So it was like mapping different configurations, finding out what was different, talking to the Starfighter team, seeing what had changed. If there were new gameplay modes, I think, and so writing
Hmm.
up little descriptions for each of them. And so again, it's like the technical writing is more just about writing manuals, and so I did that for a couple different games over there. One of my favorites was working on Jedi Knight, Jedi Outcast. And
Hmm.
so that's like with Kyle Katarn, and just it was for the special editions because it originally came out for the PC. So when they decided to do a special edition for the Xbox, it was taking all the PC keyboard controls and then mapping them to the Xbox, figuring out what was going on, all the changes, and then writing all of that. And so I think I really enjoyed that because it was an excuse for me to play the entire game and get to know the game and then write about it. And so that was really exciting for me. And we were talking about lightsabers earlier too. For me, uh, like I view Star Wars in a very different way, just because it was such a big part of my life. Like I was at LucasArts for 3.5 years, 4 years during Episode 2 and Episode 3, and so for me, it's hard for me to view them objectively because for me, I was always trying to analyze like how does this impact the game, like what does this mean. So for like Attack of the Clones, I was working on a bounty hunter game, and so like I was thinking about Jango Fett, like how is he involved, like what is he doing, what's his backstory, what's all of that, everything that's going on there. And so again, like I I had this appreciation for it in a different way, in that I wasn't viewing it as a fan, but more as a creator and as an artist and as a writer, and so yeah.
So, okay, I want to, because you brought up Ultima, I want to talk about Ultima because it's one of
Uh-huh.
my all-time favorite game series. Love all of those games, but I know that you've talked before about Ultima 4, which remains to me sort
Yeah,
of like a gold standard of where all of a sudden role-playing games and computer games changed for me completely, because it became not just about how many
yeah,
orcs do you kill, it became about how does your character grow. And I mean, talk a little about Ultima. What is it that
yeah.
you about Ultima 4, Quest of the Avatar, that captured you?
Yeah, so up until then, like a lot of the RPGs I played were very simplistic in that, there's a villain, go beat the villain, maybe save a princess or save some people, save towns, which again were great. But with Quest of the Avatars, well, let me back up there. Like, I played Ultima 3 Exodus on the Nintendo, and I remember just going through it and feeling like it was a really difficult game for me. And so and there was so much to the quest, and I remember when I beat it, I had such a strong sense of accomplishment that it really meant a lot to me. So I was like, when I saw part four coming out, or it was part two on the Nintendo, I was like, I have to have this game. And I remember when I first started it up, it was so different in that it begins with like almost like the tarot cards where you're making morality choices, where they
Yeah.
ask you like if this happened or if this happened, like what kind of a person are you? And so depending on like the how you answered those questions, it determined like kind of your fate and what kind of character you are. And so again, like all of the questions that they asked were very morally ambiguous, right? It wasn't like a clear cut right and wrong. And so then when you start the game, your objective is to become an avatar, right? It's not, hey, go save the princess, or hey, go defeat this great evil. It was literally just to become a good person. So it's like, if there's people who are impoverished, help them out. If there's like a blind salesman, like don't cheat them, right?
Hmm.
But like they set up the gameplay in a really interesting way, where, for example, with honesty, the magic is dependent on the ingredients.
Hmm.
But with the ingredients, I mean, the ingredients can be expensive, but you need the magic in order to fight. And so, like, if you can't get that much money, like a much easier way to get the basic magic ingredients is to lie to the shopkeeper, right?
Hmm.
So, what do you do there, right? Again, like just these morally ambiguous things where like, are you going to stick to that code, or are you going to take a shortcut and then you get more magic and then you can defeat more enemies and then and stuff like that. And so for me, like as a pretty young kid playing that, I was just blown away by the mechanics and just the it became less about the the game designer telling you a story and more about you creating your own story and more
Hmm.
about the decisions you made as the avatar. And so I love that about it. Um, yeah,
Well, and I
I'd
think
love
that
to hear
what
more of your thoughts on Ultima.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think what's interesting about it is that to someone who's never played it, they might think, well, it sounds kind of preachy, be a good guy, don't break the rules. But the way that it was crafted, that wasn't it at all. Because they asked you, they said, look, we
Yeah.
need to have the people. In fact, we were just talking about this about hope, that the people of Britannia needed hope. And they needed
Hmm.
someone to show them the path towards
Hmm.
breaking free of the darkness that had long sort of ruled over all of them that you'd been fighting in the last three games, right? And they said, we need you to go out and
Yeah.
show people that this can be done. And it became this sort of effort for
Yep.
you to
Hmm.
show people that you could be a better person. You could grow as a person. There was a way. And even if you made mistakes, there
Hmm.
were ways back again. And I think that's what was so interesting about it. It wasn't just about
Yeah.
gaming the system, and that was part of it too, is that I like when you did those tarot cards, you as we tried to game that so much and we figured some things out, but you couldn't. In the end, you just had to answer them honestly and end up
Yeah.
with what you ended up with, because it wasn't about there being a perfect answer. There was
Uh-huh.
about getting as close to the right choice as you could for you. And I
Uh-huh.
just thought that was amazing that somebody took
Yeah.
that risk in a game design at a time when no one else was going
Yeah.
anywhere near that. Even today, they don't really, right?
Yeah. I also loved the ending where like the final battle is against yourself, right? Like or all like the
Hmm.
virtues, and you just have a big battle. And again, it was a symbolic battle, but it was about conquering yourself. And that to me, I was like, whoa! I was blown away by that. And it's not like a shadow self; it's like literally yourself. You beat like the personification of all of the virtues. And like I when a work challenges you in that way, it really like you remember that moment, right? Like when I
Yeah.
played Ultima, I still remember like wow, like that really shook me, right? And so I think those are the kind of works that as writers we hope or we aspire to, right? I another example. I don't know if it's okay to do spoilers. I don't know how much of a spoiler it is, but for Dark
For,
Knight,
oh,
like
okay.
the Batman versus Joker, um,
I think
one of the
spoilers
most
are
amazing
fine at
things
this
there was
point. We're
the
far
actual
enough
hero.
along that we're good on
Okay,
spoilers for that one.
yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, what blew me away was the ultimate hero wasn't Batman or Joker. It was the people because they ultimately decide not to blow up the boat, right? Like the two
Hmm.
boats. And that is like, there's that moment where Joker is shocked. It's like the first moment he's not laughing because he realizes, the people, because he wanted to prove like the world was evil and everything. And then the people were like, no, we're not going to do that. And that is ultimately what crushes him and destroys him, right? And defeats him rather than like Batman tried to do everything, like everyone tried to do everything and they ended up getting defeated over and over again, but it was the people. And so like those kind of messages where it's I guess it's not that subtle, but like just to have a more meaningful, impactful message about humanity and like the potential for humanity. Like I love that kind of message, and Ultima is like the perfect example of that. I do also love how in part 5 he totally, Lord Richard Garriott totally corrupts that because all the
Hmm.
virtues are totally corrupted,
Yeah.
and so that was an interesting take on it too.
Yeah, they're great games. If anyone wants to play these, you can get them on Good Old Games, which is a website that sells old games, uh,
Yeah.
tweaked so you can run them on your computer. And they're, you probably get them all for like $10. So I'm just saying, maybe to start with three. Trust me,
Uh-huh.
as someone who's recently tried to play 1 and 2 again, and even 3, it's a little bit tricky. But otherwise, you could always just jump straight to 4 and you'd be fine with it. So as you're going along. Well, what other things? So we're talking a little bit about Ultima. We talked about some of the things that
Yeah.
inspire us and inspire you. I mean, are there other games or shows or things that you've been getting into lately that have been like, God, that is good. I'm really impressed by it or wished I had worked on it type of a thing.
I'm so sorry. Like you broke up the last sentence.
Oh, I was saying, are there any shows, or we are talking about things that we like and that are exciting to us? Are there any shows or games that you've been getting into lately, or books you've read where you've been like, "Oh, that is awesome. I would love to have done that myself." And what are the things that were really sort of been grabbing you lately?
Yeah, I've been going back to a lot of the classics. So, like Philip K. Dick, I was rereading some of his older short stories.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, Philip K. Dick is great, and
oh
I
yeah,
think that
or,
for folks
sorry,
who
can
don't
you hear
know,
me?
well, you cut out, you stopped there for a second. I don't know if you froze. We're doing, like I said, a little bit of technical problems, but we'll fight our way through it. Yeah, Philip K. Dick is fantastic. And for folks who don't know, he wrote the original story that Blade Runner was not at all based off of, in my opinion, but that's something else entirely. But, um, what is it about Philip K. Dick stuff that just gets you?
So I love Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. I've read it, like
Yeah.
I think that's one of the books that I've read the most, just because for me, like they sort of work together.
Hmm.
And just like because there's that third layer, I think the movie's missing where they actually get into Mercer, who's like kind of their
Yeah.
religious figure, and the Mercer relationship to humanity, and then humanity's relationship to androids, and just like even the title, where Deckard in like the movies, it doesn't really show his motive for
Yeah.
why he's hunting down the replicants, but in the book, it's actually because he's embarrassed about his electric sheep, right, which breaks down, and so he wants to buy a real animal, right? And so like then it gets into like, oh wow, like he's he feels morally ambiguous about this whole situation, and yet he also wants to prove his status because if you have an electric animal, then it's kind of like a lower status, thing. And so and then it gets into the whole religion of Mercer, where Mercer like challenges him with all this stuff, and just the layers were so rich, and so when I saw Blade Runner, there were a lot of this, like the owl has a completely different significance when I read the book versus when I saw it in the movie.
Hmm.
And then also like Minority Report, which I just reread, Paycheck, again, another
Yeah.
really great, really fun story. We can remember it for you wholesale. Like in all of those, what I love most is like in Minority Report, I love the Steven Spielberg movie. And yet in the story, what was so powerful was in the end, he realizes the thing is corrupt. He realizes it's faulty, but then he decides to sacrifice himself anyways because he believes in the overall system. Whereas
Yeah.
in the movie, they bring it down, right? They say, let's shut it down. And so there's like kind of this interesting exchange of obviously like fate, and like just humanity, destiny, and what it really means to be human, and so again that's always had like a really big impact on me. I think just recently I've been replaying a lot of the older games, so I played Xenogears, which again that gets into
Mhm.
religion, aliens, like, and just why were humans created. And then another game that I just happen to have, um, that actually got me on this TV show binge was the X Files game. So it's
Oh,
a
okay.
fantastic FMV game, very short. But like I watched it and I was like, man, I missed the X Files, and so I've been on a binge. So I'm up to season 3 right now, but just rewatching everything. And like I know people have said season 2 and 3 are like some of the best, but I actually really like season 1 because I felt season 1 felt really raw, and like the characters still feel pretty vulnerable. And so like there are just a couple episodes. Like there's the one, I'm not remembering the title name, but like uh, 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 Scully's father passes away,
Hmm.
and then she meets like this guy in prison who can kind of communicate with him, and just like it really challenges her sense of faith and belief and stuff like that. And so like episodes like that really have impacted me and like really like moved me. And so I just watch it and I'm just kind of in awe of like how every episode, like even the bad episodes, feel so creative, right, and so interesting. And they draw on like this zeitgeist of like pop culture, technology, conspiracy, conspiracy, paranoia, and everything. And so yeah, it's just I'm really enjoying the series. So
So, we're talking about all these different things. If you could work on anything that you wanted to, if they said just pick one, we'll let you work on it. What would you pick? I mean, what would be sort of your dream thing to write? or to work on?
It's interesting because there have been opportunities that have popped up to work on certain franchises, and for
Hmm.
me, I'm excited about it, and I'm always honored. But I really want to focus on my own creative
Yeah.
works, and a big part of that is because, like, I've had the chance to work on bigger movies and stuff like that, and so for me, like, I'm not saying I would never say no to anything. Like, I'd be open to anything, but right now, I feel like the projects I'm working on are the ones that I'm most passionate about. And so again, I apologize because I can't talk about them, but like I really feel because like for example, I love Star Trek. I love I really enjoy Bond, but like Star Trek, like there's so much that's been done. Like what more can you do that'd be new, right?
Yeah.
I mean the novels, like just there's so much good work and just um, like I feel like I'm excited to see the older IPs coming back and being kind of rebooted and stuff like that. But I feel also like I get so excited when I see brand new works and brand new IPs that are just totally original, and that's what I'd love to see more of. And that's what I kind of I want to focus myself on.
Well, that's one of the things that I always is inspiring to me as well is saying, what are the things that have come before that I loved? And what could we use
Hmm.
more of? It's just not just that again, but it's got the essence, the vibrance, the energy, the draw of those things, but it's something totally new, someplace we've never gone before. And I think that that's a definitely a
Hmm.
cool thing to aim for, especially in a world where, like you said, reboots are around every corner. It seems like these days everyone's
Yeah.
looking for what's the thing we can bring back and cash in on, basically, for from a business perspective. um so let me ask you a question. I want to ask you another question about your books. um when you're, you've got mechs in it, right? You've got, I mean, you've got to not only have deep ideas about, what's it like from the World War II from an Asian perspective. You've got the concepts of dystopia, but I mean, you've got to also love giant robots beating the crap out of each other. I mean, there's always got to be some level of that the Pacific Rim part that you're just like, oh yeah, that's just awesome too.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because when I first wrote United States of Japan, I actually hadn't seen Pacific Rim yet, and like for me, the biggest influences from a mecha perspective was actually Hideo Kojima's Zone of the Enders, because I loved how fast they were, like the mechas. The action was like they were flying all over the place, and it just felt like really impactful. And I always love the anime kind of melodrama stuff,
Uh-huh.
and then also like the Pat Labor series. Again, like Neon Genesis Evangelion and stuff. So, like that history really impacted me, and sort of that emphasis on the characters and like really being invested in the characters so that when you see the mechas fighting, it's not just these, amazing looking robots, but actually it's about the pilots within and how they each handle and how they each fight, right? Because the way they could have the exact same mecha, but their fighting styles would be completely different depending on what they prefer. And so it also got me thinking, like what are their actual fighting styles? So you'll see in Mecha Samurai Empire, some people are more into like judo versus like what kind of weapons do they like to use? Are they more of a melee, or like do they like to stand back and use projectile weapons and stuff like that? So each one has their specialty, and then there's all sorts of different types of mechas and whatnot. And so again, it gets into their personality, like how is the way the mecha functioning reflect who they are as people, and like how do you get a sense of who they are. So to use another video game example, like Street Fighter 2, everyone kind of you get a sense of who their characters are based on the way they fight, right?
Mhm.
And so in the same way, I want to reflect that with the mechas. I think United States of Japan was less about the mechas. It was kind of interesting for me because a lot of the promotion was very mecha heavy, whereas when it was translated into Mandarin in China, they actually de-emphasized the mecha completely and they focused entirely on alternate history.
Huh.
And so that was like kind of interesting thing to see because they were much more interested in that aspect of it. Whereas I think with Mecha Samurai Empire, I just went full on mecha. But like the fact that they could promote it from a purely alternate history and even leave out the mecha aspect of it. I thought that was kind of really interesting. Whereas Mecha Samurai Empire, it's very heavily like, hey, these people grew up in this world. Like, what would their view be on it and stuff like that? So
Well, that's actually a really cool accomplishment on your part, because the reality is that if you can pull something out that seems so integral to what's being told, and yet the story holds together in a rich and compelling way. I mean, nice work. Good job on that one. That's tough to pull off, and not everyone
thank
can
you.
do that. Well, we don't have too much time left, so I want to take a second to do something we always do at the end of our show, and that's to talk a little bit about someone who you really like, that you think is really cool, that maybe needs to get more of a spotlight, or who maybe people just haven't found out about yet. And hang on for a second here. I have something to share. See, let me bring this up. There we go. So we've got Casey Alexander. Tell us about Casey Alexander.
Yeah, I love her books, Necrotech and Nanoshock. She's an amazing writer. Like I would like her works are very visceral, very intense, and just awesome. And so I highly, highly recommend her. Yeah, I mean, I almost don't want to spoil anything. I'd say just dive in because they're really fast reads and they're really, really good. And so, yeah,
That's
I
awesome.
really like Casey's work. So,
This looks like it's from Angry Robot. So I can see the little angry
yep,
robot up there at the top. So if folks are looking for Casey Alexander, want to check out some of her stuff, you have a chance to do so now. We've got another one to add to your list as you take a look at this. Well, before we wrap up completely, I want to talk about something that's on everybody's mind, especially because we're on Gen Con TV. Conventions. You don't have anything scheduled just yet. Hopefully next year sometime, right? It's
yeah.
before you can get back out into the world. You miss it, it seems like.
I definitely miss it. I really miss fans. I really miss being all the authors. I really miss just being in that environment. And it's so creative and people are so excited. And I mean, I love seeing all the new stuff out there. Like I miss Gen Con. I can't believe it's been like like 6 or 7 years since maybe longer, since I was there. And just, like, I remember when I was there, it was such an amazing, conference and, just the environment and just all the tabletop games out there. I mean, there were so many different kinds, and the writer symposium was amazing, and so I really genuinely miss it. And I also loved Indiana, just like a lot of the restaurants. Like every night we went out to a new place, and it was really good. So I really miss it. So
Yeah, this isn't an advertisement for Gen Con. It's just truly like there's something about the vibe. You get there, you get out
yeah,
of the car and you look around and you're like going, "Oh my God, I'm with my people. This is amazing."
yeah,
Everywhere you
yeah,
turn, or every restaurant you go into, the conversations, it's like you're at home. So yeah, it's
yeah.
definitely very cool. Well, hopefully you will be able to make it back again some point in the near future. But for now, we're going to wrap up. Thank you so much for being on the show, Peter. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, folks, that's it. You have used up another hour listening to us to talk about all sorts of things, from mechs to alternate history to Ultima, which is an amazing game. And I love those games so much, to Casey Alexander, who you should definitely check out. That's it for today's show. Make sure to join us next week. Next week, #1 New York Times bestselling author Wesley Chu is going to be on the show, author of the Tau trilogy and the Time Salvager series. So make sure to be there with us. But for now, that's all we've got for today. Thanks, and we'll see you next week.